I'd like to call this meeting of the Maple Run Unified School District Board of Directors to order at 6:02 p.m. Today is Wednesday, January 6, 2021, and we are meeting electronically. We have 9 board members present, representing 8.5 votes. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year.
Our first item is the agenda review. I don't have any changes. I'd look for a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So moved.
Thank you, Al. Second.
Second.
Thanks, Steve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Ayes have it, 8.5 to 0. And if you guys could just let me know when Joanna pops in, that would be helpful. Thank you. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
The United States of America,
for which it stands,
One
nation, under God,
with liberty
indivisible,
and justice.
liberty and justice for all.
For all.
Thank you. Am I right, Brenda and Jason, that we don't have any visitors?
You have Mike and Aaron here.
Do we have any visitors who wish to address the board? All right, seeing none. We'll move on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda is just the minutes of December 16th. If I don't hear any objections to any items on the consent agenda, then the consent agenda will be adopted. Seeing no objections, the consent agenda is adopted. And now on to item 6A. Dr. Dirth with a COVID update.
Thanks, Jeff. Good evening, everybody. Happy New Year. There's not a lot to talk about today because things are, at the moment, going relatively smoothly and we seem to have most things in place. As always, I realize tomorrow might be different. As you guys know, after the last board meeting, looking at some of the information we were receiving, we thought it might be worthwhile to take Monday and Tuesday and do things a little bit differently after the Christmas, New Year's break. So just to reiterate again what you probably already know, we took it in in-service day that was already scheduled for January 19th and moved it to Monday. So we had the teacher in service Monday, and then the 19th will be a regular school day. And then Tuesday, we made a remote day. That allowed us to be able to look at the metrics that we continually look at to make sure everything would be ready for opening on Thursday, back to person. And that actually turned out to be a good move because we did start looking at the metrics on Monday and we did find that there was going to be one issue within the district that we had to deal with. Mainly, there was a team at City School that we had some staff sickness, and the sickness was significant enough so that we did decide that for that one team, we would have to go remote on Thursday when the kids come back. So for about 2 weeks, starting Thursday, that one team at City will be remote. And most of those faculty who are ill will still be teaching actually, but they'll be home. And but otherwise, everything else seems to be okay. And we plan on opening on Thursday as planned. And again, we take it day by day. As we know, numbers are up within the state, within the community. So we still monitor every single day to make sure we're able to do things. But right now, as I say, Thursday, except for that one team, will be fine. You probably also know the governor and the AOE has made the decision to open winter sports. So he mentioned that they were gonna allow it the day after Christmas. We moved that back. So I believe it's this week. Brett, what's the exact day that sports is starting, practices?
We started with the first official school day, which was yesterday.
Yesterday.
And Kevin, that is just practices, or have they said games can be played?
Practices for the time being. I don't know, have they made a date where we can start doing games, Brett?
The 31st was the earliest that was even mentioned, but they're not allowing it, period, right now.
Actually, the first games are scheduled for the 20th, but they have to make that decision.
Say it again, Tim?
We have games scheduled for the 20th, but I don't think it's going to happen because there's no contact. In hockey right now, there's no contact, and you can't go from no contact to a game. But there's games actually scheduled on January 20. Whether that happens, who knows?
Okay.
There's not even scrimmaging allowed right now. Not even inter-squad scrimmaging. That's not allowed.
No.
And the governor said that he would go week by week
Yes,
to make that decision.
yes. So they're up and running. I hope everything works out fine. As you hear, they're taking one step at a time with sports. We had our second round of testing for all staff yesterday. We didn't have as many staff do the testing. It's voluntary, as you I think you know, mainly because yesterday was a remote day, so some teachers were doing remote from home and chose not to come in. But we still had 200 staff members be tested, so we should know in a couple of days the results of those tests. And again, this is being done monthly, and we already have a schedule right through, I believe, May, when everyone will get tested. And this is a good thing. Last time, as I think I mentioned to you, everybody came back negative, but it's just a good way to monitor everything and allow people to feel a little bit more comfortable moving forward. The only other thing I have, which you've probably seen in the literature too, we initially decided that we weren't going to do anything locally around a dashboard to give statistics about when we have cases. And because the state was already doing that, and there is a state dashboard that if you can look at every school and see where the cases are for COVID. We're finding that the state one's not overly accurate, and sometimes it doesn't get updated for weeks and weeks. So we chose to do our own local Maple Run dashboard, which we do have. And Brenda, perhaps, again, we've done it on the literature, but Brenda, perhaps if you have a chance, you could put it into the chat, the link for anybody who might want to look at that. And because it is local and Brenda runs it, that's being pretty much taken care of real time. So you can see at any point how we're doing within the district. Cases in the district are average. There's a lot other places that are a lot worse, but we do have a few, and they're being handled very, very well. And with the collaboration with the Department of Health, things are still continuing to go well with that. That's all I have. If you have any questions.
I can share that screen if you want, Kevin.
Sure.
Can everybody see that?
Thank Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah. So that's right from the maplerun.org site, the COVID-19 resources link.
And Kevin, just to clarify, that it includes students and staff?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions for Kevin about this? So the next item is the superintendent search update.
Quick question, Jeff.
Okay, go ahead, Grant.
Has there been any indication of when the vaccines will be made available to teachers, and how is that going to be communicated when it is time?
Good question. When you have an answer, let me know.
So, I mean, are you expecting to hear from the state? Do you even know how it's going to be rolled out?
We haven't been told a thing. And
Okay.
as you may or may not know, they downgraded or extended the time when educational staff will get it. It used to be in the next phase, and now that's not the case. Vermont made the decision to go with certain age groups first.
Yep.
And we have no idea when our staff will get it, but they haven't communicated that to us.
And is the only recourse for that, community letters to the governor and your house, your representatives and whatever else? Is it normal political, or do you guys have some pull through the superintendents?
That's being communicated pretty strongly.
Okay. Thank you.
We haven't got anywhere yet, but I do know that there's a lot of pressure, and it sends the wrong message in my estimation. You want to keep your schools open.
Yeah.
You want to keep them safe, and yet you want to put your educators at risk. And that's not saying that there isn't some justification with the elderly getting it too. So I'm not saying that either. I'm not trying to pit one against the other, but it does send kind of a wrong message. And I'm hoping they're going to be looking.
Oh, Kevin,
Thank you.
being in that elderly age group, I'd rather my granddaughter's teacher at city school was vaccinated and takes my turn. It's they're dealing with all those kids and
Well, in their defense, for what it's worth, they're saying schools continue to be the safest place for everyone. That they're not getting it in schools. That the transmission rate in schools is next to nothing. It was like a 0.2%. And so that's why they're saying, let's go with the age group that is having the most issues around sicknesses. And you can't just go by them and slap them in the face and say they're wrong with that. They made a decision, and it's a tough decision, but in the meantime, your people who are working with so many kids are going to have to wait a little bit longer.
And they did say too that some teachers might fall into other categories, like people with pre-existing conditions that make them more vulnerable,
Or who are of the age.
or of the age.
Yeah.
I think they're also just too hoping that the supply is going to ramp up a lot as more get approved.
Right.
Yeah.
I will add something we learned yesterday. There are certain individuals within the district who are going to be allowed to test, psychologists, nurses, some people who are working from the medical point of view are going to be in that phase we're in now. But that's it at this point.
As the numbers on the chart, the data board from Maple Run, does that bear out the fact that kids aren't as affected as adults? Are those cases in Maple Run mostly adults versus kids?
I'm hesitating because we've tried to keep that information. We're not going into the information about kids versus adults.
Okay,
Yeah, I would be
All right,
careful
understand.
about disclosing employee information potentially.
I understand.
Okay, so let's move on to item 6B, the superintendent search update. I'm guessing, Jack, that we should just move this into executive session.
Yes, I mean, I think part of my discussion with our committee will be executive session material, but the other part would be open meeting, and I'm fine with doing it at the end of the meeting. I think it's kind of awkward in Zoom to kick a whole bunch of people out for a period of time and then come back in. I don't know if that's easy or hard, but
I think that's what we'll do is we'll do the executive session at the end and then
yeah.
have your statement part after that.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so I'm going to move the superintendent search update into executive session under 1 VSA 313A3, the appointment or employment of a public officer or employee. Thank you, Jack. Okay, item 6C, FY22 budget. Martha.
Just what you've been waiting for, huh?
Exactly.
Okay, so I had Brenda upload the packet of information to the agenda, so hopefully you have a copy of it in front of you. I will go through it page by page, kind of indicating what's been changed from the last meeting to this meeting. So on page 1, that's basically the exact same information that was presented 2 weeks ago with a slight adjustment on the area where it says information still outstanding. I've put little check boxes in front of the things that have actually come in. So we've gotten our tech ed 6th semester FTE student count in, that was helpful. The equalized pupil count, I've gotten a preliminary number. It's not the final number at this point, but it was something to work from. But again, it's just a preliminary number. We've gotten our special ed block grant amounts. Still waiting on the IDEAB grant allocation. We usually get that information right about now, but the way AOE is working right now, I'm not sure if I'm going to get that information or not. We got the early childhood block grant amount information. Transportation aid, we've been, a few business managers and myself have been in contact with AOE trying to figure out what the transportation aid amount is going to be for FY22, seeing as how the amount is based on our FY20 expenditures, and with the way transportation changed in FY20 from March to June. We used it for delivering meals versus students. So right now we're still unsure how that's going to affect our transportation aid for FY22. But the last information that I received just this morning is that we shouldn't see too much of a difference, but we'll wait and see on that one. FY20 allowable tuition rate has not come in, and that's what I usually use to kind of gauge what the FY22 tuition for high school students should be set at. So one of the future agenda items, I'll talk about that a little bit more. And we've got our Vermont Tax Department common level appraisal percentages, which showed a significant change in some of our municipalities. So that's the information on page 1. So basically everything at the top is exactly what was presented last time. Page 2 is where I show the changes from the first draft to the second draft. So our first draft, I brought forward an expense budget of $61,707,984. We did have some adjustments that I needed to make, some of them having to do with the tech FTEs that came in, some corrections that I found I needed to make, and some regular ed transportation and tuition adjustments. So this draft is being presented with a proposed expense budget of $61,861,2 $212 at this point.
Which is a difference of about 154,000.
Correct, 153,228. Yep. I have got our estimated education spending calculation. So the 61,861,212 is actually showing a 2.29% increase over the current year budget, which is, you know, a pretty pretty good target to be hitting. Our education spending right now, based on the preliminary estimates I'm using for other revenues, I'm showing it to be about $43,481,000, which is about 2.55% increase over the current year, which again, that's a really good target to be hitting at this point. The state is always looking for that number to be less than 3%. So we're doing good on that front. I've got our preliminary equalized pupil count in there, which is slightly less than our current year. It's reduced by
21.
21, yeah, 21 equalized pupil counts. But again, that's just a preliminary number, and the information when it was sent to us stated that they were still waiting for some information from the different data points. State place student information hasn't been updated, and same with the early college fall of 2019 hasn't been updated. So those figures will make a change. And also there were some school districts that their fall census data didn't look appropriate. So that number is definitely going to change. I don't know if it's going to go up or down at this point, but that's definitely not the final number at this point. Whether we'll have a final number by the time the board has to adopt the budget, I don't know that either at this point. So with that preliminary equalized pupil count, it gives us a estimated per pupil spending of $17,053, which is an increase of 3.36% over the current year, which is still a fairly decent percentage to be hitting at. And then
I would just throw out for anybody listening, the per pupil number is the number that we'd like to look at, because the total expense budget might go up or down, but it really, that per pupil number tells us, yeah, your expenses went up, but you're also teaching more students.
Right. Right. So the next piece is the notes to the board. It just kind of, I updated the information under the different breakouts for the wages and the benefits and so on and so forth to match what the proposed budget is at this point. And then a little explanation of the different areas where I made the adjustments of the $153,000. I will talk about the announced tuition later, so I'll just skip over that for now. The next two pages are just the updated information on the summary expenditures. The different areas were updated based on where I needed to make those minor change, $153,000 worth of changes. And then the estimated revenue sheet, which is page 5 of the packet, has also been updated based on the new information that I've gotten, which adjusted the education spending amount. The 6th page is the one that I'm sure everybody looked at right off and probably some jaws dropped. So this is where we do our estimated tax rate calculation. And again, I want to stress over and over again that this is an estimate. There are many factors in here that are not final. One of them being the equalized pupil count, the yield, and then our budget. So with the updated expense and revenue information, we're showing the ed spending per equalized pupil at $17,053. And when you divide that by the yield, you come with a $1.5844 tax rate. That's the education tax rate estimated at this point. We still have a 2-cent merger incentive, so that drops us to $1.5644. That's the education tax rate. Then you take the common level of appraisal by municipality, and you factor that in to come up with the tax rate that the individual see on their property bill. St. Albans City's common level of appraisal, the percentage went up slightly, which helps the tax rate calculation, but still it's at 89%, which means that starting at $1.56, when you take that 89% factor in, it brings the tax rate, the adjusted tax rate, to $1.75. And that's the figure that the taxpayers would see if this were the final numbers. St. Albans Town is the one that had the largest change in their common level of appraisal. It went from 101%, which means their tax rate in prior years, instead of it being adjusted to a higher rate, was adjusted to a lower rate. But that common level of appraisal percentage adjustment went down to 95%, which is a significant change, which it's been many years since I've seen a common level of appraisal make that big of a change in 1 year.
Well, the town's been over 100 for a long time.
Yes, it's been over 100 for quite a few years. And because it has such, it drops so much, it's having a significant impact on the tax rate. So it's taken the $1.56 tax rate and converting it to $1.64, which over last year's tax rate, which was $1.44. which is a 20-cent tax rate increase if this is the final tax rate. Again, these are not final numbers. And Fairfield, their common level of appraisal went down slightly. But again, when you take the $1.56 and you adjust it by 87%, it brings the tax rate to $1.78, almost $1.79. So I thought it would be helpful, and I've done this in prior years, and I thought it would be helpful tonight. I have a page 7, which is an additional page to the packet, which actually breaks down the tax rate increase and what parts and pieces come from what area of the calculation. So to start off with the yield change, it generated 3 1/3 cent increase in the tax rate. The decrease in our equalized pupil count, which again is just a preliminary number, so that could go up or down. Right now at this point, it's affecting the tax rate by a penny, 1 1/4 pennies. We have our merger incentive, which last year we had a 4-cent decrease in our tax rate. This year we have only a 2-cent decrease in our tax rate. So that's a 2-cent change in the tax rate. And the 3.8 cents is the actual result of our budget, what we're presenting, our budget with our estimated revenues. So we really have control over 3.8 cents of the tax rate increase. And then there's the effect of the common level of appraisal. So in city's case, that adjustment equated to about 2/3 of a cent, whereas in town it's almost 10 cents, and in Fairfield it's 5 1/3 cent adjustment. So that's a general overview of the budget from start to finish. And anybody have any questions?
I'm quite happy with that 2.29% increase on the budget side.
Mm-hmm.
And even the 3.36 per pupil. We'll see where that ends up.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that seems like a quite reasonable number to me.
Right.
And knowing that, I don't know where I have it, 1 cent.
1 cent on
is
a 10.
$275,000.
Correct.
We would have to cut a lot in order to make up a little
Mm-hmm.
in the tax rate.
Yes.
What do other board members think? We also, you know, a big number is where that yield is going to end up. So
Right.
right now, it's the number you're using is what they set in at the report in December,
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Which was just an estimate.
Which is just an estimate.
Yeah.
And usually that estimate, they use a very conservative estimate. And in my experience, it's always been when the yield has been finalized, it's always been adjusted in a way that actually lessened the tax rate increase.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, that we're definitely going to see that this year as well. They've already been talking about that, and I think last year when they set the yield, they tried to help us out.
Right.
Having said that, as of right now, there's no money coming from the federal government that would help us with that or help the state with that. Now, given the happenings of today, the politics might change in the near future, but right now, there's no money that's going to be helping change that yield.
From COVID relief funds. Is that what you're talking about?
There is money coming from COVID relief funds to the schools, but that won't be part of the yield.
Right.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Right.
Not for general operating expenses, but
Right.
because there is additional COVID money. Board members, any comments?
I agree with you. Oops,
Oh,
sorry.
I did have a question, Martha, about transportation. I noticed the cost was down pretty considerably, and I just wondered what that was
Was down or up?
down for the proposed budget. That's why I know I'm supposed to ask about the other way, but I just wondered if it was because of the transportation for meals or if it was something.
The student transportation is actually up. I'm not sure. Are you
Yeah, 'cause
talking
it's
about
also-
on the revenue side?
No, I was talking about.
It would be on
Sorry.
page 3.
Oh, I was on page 4.
Okay.
Sorry.
Page 4. So that would be student transportation for
Oh, for resident students.
on page 4. What number are you talking? Just so I know what you're looking at.
439,280.
Correct.
Okay, that's for special ed services. So
Okay, so that's dependent on the students.
correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank
Yep.
you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Well, and that leads me to, Martha, it does look like the item that went up the most, again, I think as we saw last year, is special ed at like 5.5%.
Right.
Do we have any idea where the most of that is?
Well, I don't have any specifics right off the top of my head, but the majority of the increases are largely based on the incoming student needs. And I don't know if Andrea is on here, and if she could speak to that, I'm not sure.
I don't think I can speak to that. I think
Right.
that's too specific for me to answer.
Right.
But that's what we've seen in the past.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then we didn't talk about health insurance, Martha, but that is,
Health
it
insurance.
didn't come out at the bad 9% number, but
No, it ended up coming out about 7.55%. And that's because that's that's the average. There is some staffing changes on, what they enrolled in. And then there's, staff that leave and staff that come in and what they take for insurance and so on and so forth. Besides the rate increase. Correct.
And that's what the adjustments were that you made between draft 1 and draft 2. You finalized those personnel changes.
Right. Yes, exactly.
I'd like to know what other board members think, but I'm comfortable with this budget. I thank the administration. I think you did a great job on holding expenses down. And we're just gonna have to wait and see, I think, what the legislature comes up with.
Yeah, Jeff, I agree with you. I think the budget looks good. And thanks, and I'll echo what Jeff said. Thank you. I know Martha spends a lot of time on this, but I did have a question. And I know we've probably talked about that. Is there any consensus of what other budgets are coming in or being proposed? Maybe
Yeah, I think
premature.
Kevin should have some information.
Yeah, I think he has some information on that.
We're pretty much right there in the middle. I had a talk today with the Superintendent's Association on this. Everyone's in the same part. They're all coming in around 2 to 3%. They're all very, very pleased with their budgets and proud of what they've done. And yet they're all having 10 or 20 cent increases in their tax rates. And they're frustrated and concerned. CLA has kind of done the same thing throughout the state because of housing prices going up. And the yield obviously is a statewide yield. So they're all in the same boat and all hoping for from either some federal help or something to change that yield. Nothing's going to change the CLA.
Right.
Yeah, those numbers in that last page or page 7 is, yeah, wow.
Yeah. Pretty helpful to see it spelled out that way.
Yeah, thank you. That does help. Every year, wow. That's all I got to say.
So, Jeff, my comments are, I think Martha does a fantastic job in, cooperation with all the administrators, keeping the costs where they can. And I appreciate the good work you guys are doing.
Thank you, Jack. Yeah, I mean, last year we asked Martha at this point, we said, tell us what 1% looks like. We asked the administrative team. I don't think that we should do that this year. I think that this budget is quite reasonable. Who haven't I heard from? Al?
Well, unfortunately, Martha, having worked with you for 14 years, actually 15 years this year, and having to sit there and tell you, well, I think that budget will go through. I think you did a great job, as you always do.
Thank you.
But
it's the taxpayers.
Yeah.
But I do agree that at this point, normally, I also would have sat here and asked, can we do another percentage down? But I think, or what we had to go through all this year, I think you did an excellent job. And I think that we will move forward with a good budget.
Do you have any comments?
Me?
Steve.
Yeah.
Then we'll go to Sue.
Just want to say thank you for a clear presentation, Martha. It always makes so much sense the way you've got it laid out and the way you describe it. And good job. Thank you.
Sue.
So I was going to say, I feel like it needs to go to the taxpayers this way. I think last year what I said was we made some cuts and I almost felt like we should have gone to the taxpayers with the original budget so that they would understand what we would have to cut. I kind of feel the same way this year. And again, I think I said this last year at this time. I think the year before we merged, our entire budget was 50 million. If you put SATEC, Town, BFA, and Fairfield all together. So for me, when I think back to 5 years ago and realize in the last 5 years, our budget has gone up by 11 million. It's hard to understand. And so I think the taxpayers are the ones that will determine, if this goes through or not.
I just wanted to be able to say what I also said to you last year, so because you're right on that. But I ask people, don't look at just the expenditure side. If it may have gone up 11 million, I'll take your word for it. But what did the revenue side go up in 5 years? And you'll find out that it's not 11 million. And a lot of that is special ed that we don't have a lot of control of, but that's also where we get some of our reimbursement.
So is there a way we could look back at that information? So that's in front of all of us when we're speaking to the taxpayers? Like compare 5 years ago to expenditures, revenues 5 years ago versus today?
I can pull that together if you want.
Thank you, because I think that would be helpful if I'm, if people come up to me and say, how come the budget keeps going up? It would be helpful for me to understand that.
I also remember it was either last year or the year before Jim's last year, we had a graph that showed the tax rate. Remember that, Martha? And
I remember that.
what happened after the merger, and it ended up like we were right back where we started.
Right.
After, again, those increases in our budget growing. But what the taxpayers were paying was, it had dropped considerably and then was back up to where we started after 4 or 5 years.
So I think for the presentation of this, that kind of information would be helpful.
Yeah, we can have that for the budget presentation in the slides.
Thanks.
Okay, is Nilda here? Nilda, you have anything?
Nilda's here, but I just missed the last 10 minutes. So what are you talking about?
Well, we were just talking about the budget and saying that in general, most of us have said that we're quite pleased with the results. I mean, not the final effect on the tax rate, but in terms of the expense budget itself. And then I was just asking people around to verify that, if people were okay with the number as it is. And so far, Nina, Steve, Al, Sue have all said that they are.
Yeah, add me to the list, I guess.
Jack said he was. Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Dan. Grant?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge is, in a year where, inflation is more or less flat, to have an increase is going to, take some communication with the taxpayers to, let folks understand why that is. I do think the value for money is there, based on the per pupil spending and, everything I know that the kids get out of this education system. So I don't think that, it necessarily needs to conform to market forces, in the same way that some other types of spending would. It's just that, getting over that sort of intuitive connection is going to be maybe a challenge. So I'm comfortable.
Okay, thank you. Any other board members want to weigh in? If not, I think we'll move on. And so, Brenda, are you still on? The 20th is our next meeting, and that's within the time limit, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So what we'll do is I would think at our next meeting on the 20th, we will adopt a budget.
But did I see, Jeff, or Martha, on your document there that we had to do the tuition rate set by the 15th? Is that what I saw?
It's one of the items on the agenda for tonight.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's
okay.
That's okay.
Yeah. Martha will go into it, but that's
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Martha.
You're welcome.
And let's move on to new business, item 7A, the draft warning. So this is here for us to look at. I believe we will adopt this at the next meeting too, when we have a budget.
Correct.
And I think I did give Brenda some changes to Article 3, just some verbiage changes around terms.
Mm-hmm.
And then Martha, did you want to talk about Article 5? Or do you want to go over more than 5?
Let me just grab my printed copy so I can. So this is going to be, right now, what you're looking at is exactly what we used last year with the dollar figures taken out at this point.
Okay.
So Article 5 is the one that authorizes the school board to take any of the current year fund balance and put it into the capital reserve fund to be used for capital improvements and operations. If the board wished to do something different, this would be the opportunity to do that at this point.
And by something different, this is the question I always ask you about, and I think you get frustrated with me. But if there ever was a time where we didn't want to move the money into the capital improvement fund and wanted to instead roll it over into next year's budget.
What we would do is, at that point, is we would just remove this whole article, because then that would revert to the law. The law is any fund balance from a fiscal year. So we're in FY21. So if we had a fund balance in FY21, if we didn't have this article, that fund balance would be used in the projections of revenue for FY23, because it needs to be the audited fund balance at that point, and that wouldn't be audited until the fall of 22.
Yeah, it would be the next budget that we work on.
Right.
Has the percentage changed?
Sorry, Al?
At what point do we have to pay back to the other communities in excess of 3%? Is that?
That's the tuition. That's the tuition. And because the state has not provided us with allowable tuition rates for the last 2 years, we haven't done that refunding and or rebilling. Until they give us that final number, we have nothing to work from. So
what I'm wondering here is is there some way that we can do it more flexibly, Martha, not an all or nothing?
Yes, you can. You can put a limit to the amount that goes into the capital reserve, and the remainder would be what would be used in future budget revenue sources.
Martha, didn't we do that one year? Didn't we do that one year, use money to offset?
Yes, but we actually had an article on the ballot to do so, that we stated that.
Yeah.
But if you said
Could
it,
we do something like, you go.
go ahead.
Finish what you were saying. I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's okay. What you could do is you could set like a percentage. You could say 50% of the fund balance, or 75% of the fund balance, or would go into the capital reserve, and any additional funds would revert to what is stated in the law. It would go towards the future budget.
And Martha, give us the spiel about what's wrong with doing that, rolling money into next year.
Well, there's nothing really wrong with it. It's just that if you were to say right now that we wanted to take our capital reserve and apply it to FY22 budget, which is the one we're working on, what would happen is, depending on the amount that you use, you would be basically creating a cliff, because you would be using all or most of your capital reserve funds to reduce the tax rate for FY22. But in doing so, you've now built a hole that you've got to backfill in the following year, because you're using that as a revenue source that you won't have in the following year. So you have to make up that difference. So I would just caution using a large share of your capital reserve to offset the next year's tax rate. But if you were to do it in a fashion where you always have the article that states a percentage of your fund balance goes into capital reserve and the rest goes into the future. Depending on any given year, you may have a large fund balance one year, so then that rolls into the future budget to reduce the tax rate. But then you may have a year where you have no fund balance, so now you've got to make up that difference again.
Right.
And I could caution you all that that's not an ideal thing to do as a city. I did that with tax rate for many years and reduced the tax rate, and then were caught with their pants down and had all that money to pay back, and taxpayers had to pay it back.
Yep. Yeah, and so I guess we are talking about two different things too, Martha, because you're agreeing then that the current capital improvement fund could be used to fund operations.
It can be used to fund operations, correct. So if we, like we do each year, Fairfield needed this major upgrade, we go to the school board authorizes us to use those funds. That's, I would consider that as operations. Or if for some reason, something less major came up and we didn't have it in the budget, we could ask the school board to use those funds to cover the costs of those operations. But yes, the way it's worded, we do have the flexibility there. It does not necessarily have to be for capital improvements.
Well, it kind of helps with unbudgeted emergencies too.
Yes, exactly.
Although we have been better at keeping our buildings up over the last few years than we were in previous years, because we would just have to wait till something basically like like boilers burst or something before we replace them, and I think we're better at that.
Right. But we're able to use those funds now to fund projects like what we did in Fairfield without having to go to the taxpayers for a bond.
So Martha, would you suggest any kind of change to Article 5, or would you suggest that we leave it the way it is?
In my opinion, I would suggest we leave it as is.
Okay.
Is it safe to assume that there's not going to be a huge, I'm assuming that we try and get as close as we possibly can so that we don't have a huge amount left over at the end of the year that gets rolled into capital improvement?
We do try. FY20 was such a crazy year the way it ended so abruptly. We did end up with a fund balance. I would say it was I don't have the final number in front of me, but it's well over $1 million. But again, that we could have had something come up and it would have been totally the opposite at the point. So
is it pretty, would we be able to look at a graph to say, over the last 15 years, this is what our leftovers look like?
I can pull that information if you want.
Point something out.
Go ahead, Al.
Fairfield just had over $1 million+ done. And where did that?
Almost $2 million.
The money goes back to the taxpayers eventually,
right?
In our improvement or things that we have to do. When it's there and we can take it from the capital improvement, it doesn't go directly to the taxpayers then, and we can say, there, we have it. So it's nothing that we do that anybody benefits from other than the taxpayer eventually. And that's why our buildings are in the condition that they are, because we've had the money in the capital improvement to do it in most cases.
Yeah.
And you also have to remember, good budgeting practice says that if you're within 1 or 2% of your budget, then that's where you should be. And in a $60 million budget, 1 to 2% is 600,000 to over $1 million. So even though $1 million sounds like a lot of money, I'd rather be on that side of the 1 to 2% than on the other side, where we have a deficit.
And I think that in our experience, our surpluses haven't been due to over budgeting, but have been due to all the people we're looking at here controlling expenses.
Correct.
I think there's pretty clear evidence of that. Anybody have any questions about the articles? We do have to decide when the informational hearing will be, and normally I believe we have that on a Wednesday to match up with our board meeting nights, and it would be the Wednesday before March 2nd, whatever that is. Is that right, Brenda?
Yes, and this year that would be February 24th.
And the rules are it has to be what, within 30 days, but not
It has to be within 10 days of the vote.
10 days.
Mhm.
Everybody okay with that? February 24th?
And that totally is a Zoom, right?
That will be a Zoom, yeah. That's my opinion anyway.
And who's doing it?
We don't know yet though.
Jeff?
Well, I'd like to add my 2 cents then.
Okay, go ahead, Al.
For all the reasons that you have put down, or all the reasons I'm going to say why you should be doing it. This is a budget that's been prepared under your tutelage, even though you are going to not seek re-election, which I wish you would.
Mhm.
The bottom line is you should make that presentation and not walk away from it.
I second that.
I knew you would, Nilda.
Yeah.
And if I have to place it in the form of a motion, I will. Truly.
That would have to wait for the next meeting, Al. It's not on the agenda.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
I would do a tag team thing with you.
Okay.
If we could come up with something where we, sort of both did it and.
Okay, we'll talk. So
Okay.
for people who are listening, I suggested that that I shouldn't give the budget presentation because I won't be here to deal with the ramifications in March. So that's what we're talking about. Okay, let's move on then. I think we're set on the warning, and let's move on to item 7B, tuition rates.
Jeff, I'm sorry, I might have missed it, but is it 6 p.m. on Wednesday?
6 p.m., yes. And we'll approve the warning at the next meeting with the budget. Martha, tuition rates.
So as I mentioned earlier, I haven't received any allowable tuition rate information for the last 2 years. So I'm going to suggest that for the K-6 and 712 tuition rates to stay the same as we are currently charging. I have not seen where that rate is too low at this point. So I would suggest that that's an okay rate to go with. And if for some reason we do get the allowable tuition rate information and we are charging less than what we could, if it's more than the 3%, we can bill out for the additional. The one that I would suggest that we do adjust is the Northwest Tech Center tuition rate. That one is the information is handled a little bit differently, and you have a 6-semester average of students, so you know exactly how many students you're going to be billing for with your proposed budget costs. So I'm going to suggest that one be set at $13,000 for FY22.
Okay, I would look for a motion to set the tuition rates for K-6 for FY22, K-6 at $11,500, 7 through 12 at $17,500, and for the Northwestern Career and Technical Center at $13,000.
So moved.
Thank you, Al.
I'll second.
Nina, thank you. And then discussion. Martha, will you just give the spiel about how the truing up happens?
Yes, so at the end of any fiscal year, I submit the stat report, which is, well, actually I don't submit it anymore. The state pulls the information from our finance system to calculate what the allowable tuition rate would be. They take the expenditures less your revenues divided by your number of students and come up with a rate that is allowable to be charged. If the rate that we charged was more or less than 3%, we're allowed at that point to either bill back or refund the sending districts the difference up to a 10% max.
So they're just making it so school districts aren't charging a fortune and making money on this.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Martha? Okay, so the motion is to approve the tuition rates for FY22 as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Ayes have it, 8.5 to 0.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. Item 8A, warrants.
Move that the warrants be approved as printed and that the authorization be adopted as approval for signatures on the thing. I haven't got it in front of me, but you know.
The board, the individual board members, yeah.
Yeah, I just lost it.
You did pretty well, Al. I thought you were reading it. All right, can I get a second?
Second.
Jack, thank you. All those in favor of approving the warrants signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? 8.5 to 0. Item 8B, superintendent's report.
Nothing additional, Jeff.
Thank you, Kevin. Board announcements, anybody have anything? No sports, Sue.
Hopefully skiing soon.
I think I heard Bill say earlier that he's coaching again. Okay, agenda items for future meetings. So at the next meeting, we will have something about the superintendent search, and we will have the approval of the budget and the approval of the draft warning. Now, look for a motion to go into executive session under 1 VSA 313A3, the appointment or employment of a public officer or employee.
So moved.
Thank you, Al. Second?
Second.
Thanks, Jack. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Who
Opposed?
do you want?
Oh, just to include Kevin, the superintendent.
Hey, quick question. I was really saddened to hear that we lost Mike Kane. Did you guys all hear that?
Yeah.
That is so
Yes.
sad. What a nice guy.
Didn't hear that.
Well,
Okay.
He had a long history at BFA, and I think he probably retired like 5 or 6 years ago, maybe a little longer.
But is still involved in education.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, he did work for BFA for a good 20 years. I'm
He
wondering.
did or did not?
He did.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, shooting some flowers or something on behalf of Maple Run, because
They're looking at, I think it was in the obituary, it had some charity. It was at the Audubon or the rec department? I can't remember.
I think it was the rec department.
Yeah.
Central office is doing something for Maple Run, and I also believe BFA is doing something.
Brett's nodding yes.
Just for clarification, the central office one is going to be, excuse me, through the Sunshine Fund. It's not from the budget.
Right.
don't we have a miscellaneous budget, Kevin or Martha?
Yes, it's what we call our Sunshine Fund.
Yeah. So I would say that as a board, it would be nice for us to do that, make that recognition, particularly in view of the fact that Joanne Wells also worked for a long time for us.
So for clarification, you're saying, sorry, you're saying to have it come from the budget.
Yes.
Okay. Have something come from the budget.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's just worth noting, I think, that BFA and NCTC met with staff over this and have come up with a plan to try to honor Mike and support Joanne. And at the cross-country practice yesterday, several extra faculty showed up. And my understanding is the coach spoke eloquently about Mike.
Good.
Thanks, Brett.
I work.
Okay,
with-
so
Thank you.
did we vote or not? Can anybody tell me? Are we in executive session?
Not yet.
Okay, so all those in favor of going into executive session signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? 8.5 to 0. Thank
Sorry,
you,
Jeff,
everybody.
Jeff, I do.